All right, here we go. Welcome to the next installment of The Wine Press and the next installment of the Gospel of the Skull Crusher Bible Study. This is now session 10. We've completed the book of Genesis. We're still in Torah. We're moving now into Numbers 22 through 24 and the story of Balaam. So the title of this session is The Unstoppable Blessing to Israel. In the previous sessions, we looked at the Abrahamic covenant. We looked at the Lord restating the Abrahamic covenant later to Isaac and then to Jacob. And we saw that the commanded blessing that the Lord spoke in Genesis 12, when the Lord said, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you, that promise or that principle, even that formula is actually reiterated and restated to Jacob, to Israel himself. And so later, here we are. This is really the next major installment, the next major deposit of Messianic prophecy, 240 years after the blessing of Jacob to Judah. Okay, that was really the last session that we looked at, was the story of Jacob blessing his son Judah, conveying that it's through that line that the royal, the scepter of Israel would come from, the king of Israel would come from Judah. And now here we are 240 years later. But again, to be clear, we're still in the first 5 books of Moses. We're still in Torah. And we're going to talk about this enigmatic prophet named Balaam. So Balaam is the son of Beor. He's from Pethor near the Euphrates. That's Numbers 22, verse 5. So I'm going to show you a map where he's actually from. We're going to look at sort of the whole backstory and just frame out the story of Balaam itself. In this session, we're going to look at the story of Balaam, but then in next session, we're really going to get into his final 2 oracles, which is where the primary messianic prophecies are found. The next major, again, installments of messianic prophecy. So Balaam is unquestionably a Gentile, first of all. And this is really profound that the Lord chose in the midst of his unfolding promise plan. From the very beginning, he's already singled out Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the children of Israel. He's zeroed in on the exclusivity of choosing a people in order to be a blessing to the whole world. But now it's fascinating that he's actually chosen a Gentile, arguably pagan prophet to deliver the next major installment of messianic prophecy and promise. And just the fact that he chose such a... not only just a Gentile and a pagan, but he actually chose, excuse me, I still need my coffee here in the morning. He actually chose an incredibly compromised individual. He chose someone incredibly compromised by money, really a contradictory figure in a lot of ways, to deliver one of the most foundational, important messianic prophecies in the whole Bible. And there's a message in that. There clearly is a message in that, which we'll talk about. So, before we even jump into looking at the passages, it's important because you'll see a lot of debate when Christians start talking about Balaam. Because there's a handful of verses that make him sound like a really good guy. Like he refers to the Lord as his God. He says, like, look, I can't do anything other than what the Lord speaks to me, and the Spirit comes on him and this sort of thing. But the testimony throughout the entirety of the biblical testimony concerning Balaam is very negative. So I just want to look at a few of these. In Joshua 13, verse 22, it says, the sons of Israel also killed Balaam, the son of Beor, the diviner, with the sword among the rest of their slain. So it clearly defines him as the diviner. It uses a lot of different terms. It says that he seeks omens, he was a diviner, and this sort of thing. And these are things that, again, we'll look at some of the scriptures, clearly forbidden by God in Torah. Clearly forbidden by God. So this is not something, he was not a faithful servant of God. He says that God is his God, and he says, I can only speak what God tells me. I can't say anything otherwise. But he clearly was not obedient to the Lord. And so, again, there's profound lessons in this whole story. 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 15, it says, they have followed the way of Balaam, the son of Beor, who loved the reward of unrighteousness. He loved the money that he made from disobeying the Lord and actually pursuing money. That was really his primary sin communicated throughout the scriptures, is his love of money, his compromise because of money. In Revelation 2, verse 14, it speaks of those who, like Balaam, who for pay taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the sons of Israel. Again, he compromised for money. And in Jude, verse 11, they perished in the rebellion of Korah. They rushed headlong into the error of Balaam for pay. And then this next little bit of information is really fascinating. So in 1967, in the village of Deir Allah in modern-day Jordan, so pretty close to the border of Israel, a bit north of Jerusalem, and then to the east of Nablus. Nablus is in the West Bank. Just over the border into Jordan is the village of Deir Allah. And in 1967, they found a bunch of inscriptions, or writings, actually. It was ink on plaster. And it's an inscription that actually references Balaam, completely outside of the Bible, completely unrelated to the Bible, but it's clearly the same individual. And it says this. It says, now again, it's fragmentary, but I've got a picture here. The sayings of Balaam, son of Beor, the man who was a seer of the gods. And it's written in ancient Canaanite Aramaic. So it's very similar to early Hebrew, but it's different. And it says, lo, gods came to him in the night and spoke to him according to these words. And then it has this big sort of prophecy or oracle. I'm fascinated by this stuff. By the way, you'd go, wait, they had plaster, a couple thousand years ago? Yes, they did. Thousands of years ago, what they used to use, and again, just as a former artist gets into a lot of the traditional materials of building and so forth, I find this fascinating. You'll see this a lot when you travel to a lot of the archaeological sites. But chemically, what you do is you take limestone, you grind up limestone into ultrafine powder, and you soak it for about a year. After about a year of having soaked, it's been slacked, it becomes lime putty. So limestone ground into powder, soaked in water, it actually goes through a chemical transformation. It becomes lime putty, which is highly caustic, which is to say it can burn you because of its base. And then you take that, usually what they would do is they would mix it with sand, and then they would level floors with it and so forth. But what happens is this lime putty, when you then introduce it to oxygen, again, out of the water after a year plus, it's quite a process. As it absorbs the oxygen on a molecular level, that lime putty turns into a matrix, a molecular matrix, and it is now reconstituted as limestone. Chemically speaking, there's no difference between the hardened plaster limestone and the original limestone that you started out with. So again, if you take that with or without the sand is going to make it a little grittier. Without the sand, you're going to get some real fine, smooth polished plaster. You can then paint on it. That's how they used to make ancient frescoes. Or in this case, again, they used ink to write these oracles. So it lasts, nearly forever. And again, if it's covered with dirt or whatnot, then it genuinely lasts thousands of years. So truly fascinating. That it refers to him as someone who, again, hears the words of the gods. The word there, interestingly, again, in the Canaanitic Aramaic is Elohim. Elohim. Very similar to Elohim, but a little bit different. Again, it refers to him as Balaam, son of Beor, a seer of the gods. And it confirms, again, that Balaam was a very well-known pagan prophet in the ancient Near East. Like, he was well-known throughout that whole region. And I find it fascinating when, again, unbiblical archaeology completely validates the biblical testimony. So the entire narrative concerning Balaam, it really centers around the Abrahamic covenant. So we have talked throughout this series of how the Lord is clearly building upon the previous promises, that each one of these deposits, as we follow that golden thread forward throughout the biblical narrative, each one of these deposits builds upon and expands and reiterates and validates the previous promises. So again, going back to the Abrahamic covenant, the very foundation of the Abrahamic covenant is, I will bless those who bless you and curse those who curse you. And so this entire story revolves around that. You have Balak, we'll talk about him, and he's actually partnered with the king of the Midianites. So the Moabites and the Midianites are the people that Israel lived with. I mean, Moses actually lived with and married a Midianite girl. He lived with Jethro, his father-in-law, in the land of Midian. That's when he finds the mountain of God. He comes to Mount Sinai, Mount Horeb, That's where the Lord enters into covenant with Israel, there in the land of Midian. But then later in the story, the Midianites become enemies of Israel because they also put a stumbling block in the way of the Israelites. Now you have this, again, a Gentile pagan prophet who's saying, look, what God has spoken concerning blessing the children of Israel through the Abrahamic covenant, again, reiterated in Genesis 27 and 28, reiterated to Israel, to Jacob. The Lord says, Balaam says, because the Lord has blessed this people, I can't speak anything else. And the story really is like what God has decreed. There is no one in the world that can foil that. This is not just some exclusive little tribal prophecy, these little tribal claims. This is a global project that's unfolding. The promises that God has spoken to Abraham up there in, when he first started speaking to him and calling him out of the region of modern day Eastern Turkey, bringing him to the land of Canaan, this whole story isn't just a little local story. It's a story that the God of heaven has ordained to bring about cosmic redemption to the entire earth. And by choosing and using a pagan Gentile prophet to speak his words, and the fact that he was unable to curse that which God has blessed, it's proof that God is sovereign. And his authority, if you will, expands far beyond just the borders of Israel. In ancient times, it was often believed that your God had authority over your land, but not necessarily the whole world. And yet you see Israel, and throughout the Bible, constantly affirming that he's the one that created everything. The God of Israel is the God of all creation. So super cool. There are parallels in this story as we're tracing the story of the two seed lines. Again, you're going to have the seed line of the serpent, the children of the snake, and you're going to have the children of Eve, the children of the righteous. And the children of Eve are always those through the line of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Again, it largely is contained through these familial lines. We've reiterated multiple times that it's not exclusive to that familial line, because the righteous line is ultimately metaphorical. It's those who do the deeds of their father, their God their father in heaven, versus those who do the deeds of their father, the devil, the righteous versus the unrighteous. But it is largely through a particular family line. When we get to this story, once again, this is the parallels here between Balak and Pharaoh, which we haven't even looked at Pharaoh yet. Are significant, and commentators note all of the similarities. What you have with Balak, the king of Moab, is a Gentile king who's trying to thwart the promised plan of God. You have a seed of the serpent who's trying to be a stumbling block to the children of Israel, who's trying to curse Israel and trying to get in the way of God's plans. We'll see the same thing later with Pharaoh. And in that sense, you can say that Balak, the king of Moab, is a kind of type of the Antichrist. He is a prefigurement of the final ultimate enemy of God, in the same way that we will see later Pharaoh was as well. So both Pharaoh and Balak try to thwart God's plans for Abraham's seed. They both fail through 3 successive attempts. Okay, both Pharaoh and Balak both try 3 times and fail 3 times in a row. Both stories end with God promising to raise up a deliverer. In the case of Pharaoh, it's Moses. Again, we'll get to that in a couple sessions. In the story of Balak and Balaam, it's ultimately the Messiah. He's prophesying straight forward to the end of the age and prophesying the Messiah. Now, if we're looking at the overall structure and sort of how do Balaam's prophecies and oracles fit in with the previous promises that have been made, I've got a little chart here. So you've got 3 figures in Torah. Again, last week we looked at Jacob, who gives the prophetic promise to Judah, and then we're dealing with Balaam here. And then later, really in a few sessions from now, we'll get to Moses and the prophecies of the cloud rider and what's called the blessing of Moses. And so in Torah, you have the blessing of Jacob, you have the story of Balaam, who ultimately blesses Israel, and then you have the story of Moses. Jacob, of course, is Israel, Moses is an Israelite, and Balaam is a pagan Gentile. And all 3 of them are used by the Lord. So that's Genesis 49. We looked at that last week. That's the oracle of Jacob to Judah. We're going to look at Numbers 22 through 24 in this session, and in the next session, Deuteronomy 33 is the blessing of Moses. And so, again, if we're looking at sort of the literary structure or the primary building blocks of promise in Torah, before that we had the proto-evangelion, we had the Abrahamic covenant, then we have the blessing of Jacob, now we have Balaam himself blessing Israel and prophesying over Israel. Later we'll have the blessing of Moses. These are the primary foundational, deposits of messianic prophecy in Torah. So the backstory, as we get to the story of Balaam, again, it's such an enigmatic, really wild story that I wanted to take some time to really park here. So we're going to do again this week and next week on Balaam's prophecies. But the backstory is that Israel now they had been slaves in Egypt for 400 plus years. They've now left Egypt, and again, it's 240 years after the prophecy of Jacob. Jacob was alive for hundreds of years as slave in Israel, and then of course died much later. And so the backstory is that Israel is now coming up out of the wilderness, out of the desert of the Exodus, and they're finally approaching the promised land. They're approaching the promised land. So they are at the plains of Moab. I'm going to look at a picture here. The plains of Moab. This particular map is from Lexham. It's from Logos Bible Software. And as you can see, some of the little paths over there on the right, those are the areas that Israel had just traveled to. They had actually gone all the way up to the north, very close to the Sea of Galilee, pushing up toward the Golan Heights, which is sort of north and then to the east of the Sea of Galilee. And there they fought against Og, the king of Bashan. And he was a giant, okay? And they defeated Og of Bashan, and then they absolutely defeated the Amorites as well. So all of the tribes that were to the north of Moab, again, the king of Bashan and then the peoples of the Amorites, they completely defeated them. And now they're camped out here. We've got another map. Just put sort of a yellow dot roughly where they were in the plains of Moab. So if you look at this map real closely, to the left or to the west is Jericho. Okay, today if you go to Israel, that's a Palestinian city or town. And then if you keep going to the west, you're going to come to Jerusalem. So when Israel came up out of the land of the desert, out of the desert of the Exodus, again, they came up to the east of the Dead Sea, and then they were camping there at the plains of Moab, and then they turned west through Jericho on their way to Jerusalem. Okay, that was the path of the Exodus when Israel finally entered their promised land. But if you're there today, from the Dead Sea, directly north is the intercontinental rift. You get the Jordan River Valley Rift. It's one of the lowest places, if not, I think it might be the lowest place in the earth. And by the way, Deir Allah at one point they had the record for the Kingdom of Jordan for the hottest temperature. It was like 50 degrees Celsius, which I don't know what that is. It's probably like in the 130s or something. It's ridiculously hot. So you get really hot down there at the lowest part of the earth, down by the Dead Sea. These are the places where John the Baptist was baptizing by the Jordan. Super hot. Again, I've baptized there multiple times on some of my tours and so forth. But just to give you a picture where they were, if you're down there in the Jordan Valley, like down there by the Jordan River, you're looking up to the hills of what were the hills of Moab, looking up to ultimately Amman. The city of Amman today is the capital of Jordan, the Kingdom of Jordan. It's up there, really up high on, you could even say mountains, up on the hills or the mountains. So if you were to, I'm going to flip it around because you're looking at me. If you were to come from the Mediterranean and you're going from the west to the east, you come to the coast of Israel, and then you slowly work your way up to the hills of Jerusalem, and then you're going to go down to the Jordan River, and then you're going to go back up to the hills of Ammon, or the hills of Moab. Okay, so this is where Israel was. They're approaching the promised land. They had just defeated the Amorites and Bashan's giants, by the way. King Og, I've qualified this. The Bible says that his bed was 14 feet long. Now, again, we can debate in terms of exactly what all these measurements meant, but it seems to me that Og was one of the last of the giants up there in Bashan. It says, the sons of Israel journeyed, and they camped in the plains of Moab, beyond the Jordan. Okay, so when it says beyond the Jordan, that means east of the Jordan, opposite Jericho. So if you're in Jericho, you're looking across the Jordan, you could see all these people camped up there in the plains as they're moving up toward the hills of Moab. Verse 2, now Balak, the son of Zippor, he was the king of Moab. Balak saw that all Israel had done to the Amorites. So he just goes, man, they just kicked my northern neighbors' butts. So Moab was in great fear because of the people, because of the Israelites, for they were numerous. And Moab was in dread of the sons of Israel. So Balak, the son of Zippor, was the king of Moab at that time. And it says that he actually partnered with, again, the king of the Midianites. Verse 5, so he sent messengers to Balaam, the son of Beor, at Pethor, which is near the river Euphrates, in the land of the sons of his people, to call him. So here's a picture. You can see Pethor is up there, really in modern-day Syria, right on the border of modern-day Turkey. So you're pushing up there into the northern mountains today, the Kurdish mountains of northern Syria, pushing up into the eastern Turkey, up into the mountains of Ararat, up in the area that I've already expressed, I believe, was Eden. It's where the Noah's Ark is, and these sort of things. So it's quite far north. And so they sent to him up there, come down. He was famous, and he was a sorcerer or a diviner for hire. You could pay him to curse or bless people or to prophesy, but it was always for money. It's always for money. I believe this is verse 6. So Balak says, please come, curse this people for me, since they are too mighty for me. Perhaps I may be able to defeat them and drive them out of the land. So, really, to be honest with you, kind of understandable that Balak is so nervous. He goes, they just defeated my neighbors to the north. He goes, maybe if I have this diviner come down here, maybe if he curses them, I'll have a bit of an advantage and I can defeat them militarily. But it's understandable that he wants to protect his kingdom and his people. He says, I'll drive them out of the land, for I know that he whom you bless is blessed. So he says to Balaam, whoever you bless will be blessed, and whoever you curse is cursed. So the elders of Moab and the elders of Midian, again, it's Moab and the Midianites, departed with the fees for divination, with the money that they were going to give him for divination in their hand. And they came to Balaam, and they repeated Balak's words to him. So then he responds, spend the night here. He said, stay with me for the night, and I'll bring word back to you as the Lord may speak to me. So he goes, basically, it's actually similar later to the story of Daniel and Nebuchadnezzar. And Nebuchadnezzar's like, tell me what my dream was. And Daniel goes, give me a night. We'll see if God speaks. So that may have been a common practice in the ancient Near East. We don't know. Balaam just says, spend the night here. I'm going to go to sleep and see if God speaks to me tonight in my dreams. And then the leaders of Moab stayed with Balaam. And then God said to Balaam, do not go with them. Don't go with them. For you shall not curse the people, for they are blessed. So he goes, you can't go curse those people. God speaks to Balaam, the pagan Gentile prophet, the diviner for hire. He says, don't go with them. So Balaam arose early in the morning, and he said to Balak's leaders, again the elders, he says, go back to your land, for the Lord has refused to let me go with you. The leaders of Moab arose and went to Balak and said, Balaam refused to come with us. So you can imagine, as a king, he goes, I just sent my elders with a bunch of money. This stubborn prophet up there on the border of Turkey. Again, none of these things existed. He's like, come on, I need this guy to curse these people. So Balak again sent leaders, more numerous and more distinguished than the former. So he goes, I'm going to really turn it up, very distinguished and more numerous. So they came to Balaam and they said to him, thus saith Balak, the son of Zippor, I will indeed honor you richly, and I will do whatever you say to me. Please come to me. Curse this people for me. You can hear the desperation. Verse 18, Numbers 22. So again, Balaam replied to the servants of Balak, though Balak were to give me his whole house full of silver and gold, that he would give me all of the gold under the mountain, I could not do anything. That's a Lord of the Rings reference. Either small or great, contrary to the command. Now here it is, of the Lord my God. So he says, the God of the Hebrews, the God of Israel, he says, that is the Lord my God. I can't do anything other than what he says. So when you read verses like this, it's easy to say, well, wait a minute, like what was his religion? And it's easy to kind of see something like that and say, maybe he was a good guy. And there's more hints of this, really, that there was a struggle, even a bit of an internal struggle within Balaam. Ultimately, he sold his soul for money. Again, the lesson here is profound, because I'll just say this and I'll pick up on it again. Having walked through some of the major ministry scandals that I've walked through the past couple of years, it really challenges. Like, we always want to put people in these neat, clean categories. Scoundrel, great guy, amazing, man of God, scumbag, loser, like deceiver, false prophet, wolf. And the reality is, and this is what's so difficult, oftentimes you find that the people are both. That they can be incredibly generous, giving, sacrificial, like for real, in very real ways, but also be wolves and scoundrels and predators. And someone can be incredibly compromised and sinful and also speak the word of the Lord. Again, I'm not saying, don't get me wrong, I'm not pointing out anyone in particular, and I'm not claiming anybody is a prophet. But in my own life, I've seen people who clearly were not living for the Lord, who spoke words that the Lord used that only God could know, like that no man could know, and words that were used to profoundly encourage me in the Lord and in my walk for decades. Like very profound, foundational prophecies in my walk that helped me to endure faithfully for many years to come. And then I look at the guy that gave me that word and I go, he was a wolf. He was a deceiver. Sometimes life is blurry, to quote the line from the Blurry Creatures podcast. Sometimes things are far more complicated than we would like to admit. We always want to say, and this is a perfect story to demonstrate it. Balaam was incredibly compromised, but he was not all bad and he was not all good. The end result, as the Bible frames him, according to what he was, which was a diviner for hire, someone who sought omens, who disobeyed the Lord, yet he seemed to want to try to obey the Lord, but ultimately in the end he sold out for money. And we'll see this today with, again, leaders. You go, man, this guy was an amazing teacher. Yes, absolutely. But there's this other side of his life that's real as well. And I wish that things, it's not supposed to be that way. We're not supposed to be bundles of contradictions. We all are to some degree, and some are obviously far more than others. But it's an uncomfortable fact of life that things are not always as neat and clean, and they often are far more complicated, confusing, quite frankly, and blurry than we often would like them to be. So again, he says, now please, Balak says, please, you also, this is Balaam. So again, they came back to him the second time. He says, now please stay here tonight. And if I find out what else the Lord will speak to me, let's see if the Lord speaks. So God came to Balaam at night and said to him, if the men have come to call you, rise up and go with them. But only the word which I speak to you shall you do. So now this is where it gets really, really confusing. God tells Balaam, go with them men. Go with those men. Only speak what I tell you to speak, but go with them. Okay, so the Lord tells him to go with them. Now watch this. Verse 21, so Balaam arose early in the morning, saddled up his donkey. Can't help but quote that line without hearing Veggie Tales. Saddle up your donkey. It's all behind us now. And he went with the leaders of Moab. God told him to go with them, but God was angry because he was going. I don't know how to answer this, and I've looked at a lot of commentaries. God tells him to go, he goes, but God was angry that he went, and the angel of the Lord took his stand in the way as an adversary against him. Now, there is a lesson here that the Lord is communicating. It's almost like this is kind of a parenthesis within the story where the Lord is making an amazing, he's teaching an amazing lesson and making an amazing parallel. But it's very difficult to explain how God says, go with them, and then he's angry that he went, and he actually stands there with a sword as an adversary against him for going because he was angry at him. It's very difficult to explain. Now, he was riding on his donkey, and his two servants were with him. When the donkey, this animal, saw the Lord standing in the way with his sword drawn in his hand. The angel of the Lord, the donkey turned off from the way and he went off into the field. So he goes off the trail, tries to walk around the angel of the Lord. He's like, I'm just going to go the long way. I'm going to take the scenic route. But Balaam struck the donkey to turn her back into the way. So Balaam hits his donkey. This is the first strike. We're going to see that Balaam hits his donkey 3 times. There is a repeated pattern in this whole story of Balaam. And part of this pattern is that Balaam hits his donkey 3 times. So this is the first hit. Then the angel of the Lord stood in a narrow path of the vineyard. So he's walking through these vineyards, and in the midst of the vineyards, there's this narrow path with a wall on one side and a wall on the other. So there's a couple walls, some vineyards. I know normally vineyards don't have walls. And when the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she pressed herself to the wall. She kind of crushed Balaam's foot. So again, he hits her again the second time. Verse 26, the angel of the Lord then went further up ahead of them. The angel of the Lord stood in a narrow place where there was no way to turn to the right hand or to the left. When the donkey saw the angel of the Lord, she lay down. She gets down under Balaam. So Balaam was so angry, and he struck the donkey with a stick. He beats her with a stick. This is the 3rd time that he beats his donkey. And then the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. The Lord opened the mouth of the donkey. So later what we'll see is that Balak appeals to and tries to get Balaam to curse Israel 3 times. And each time, Balaam can only speak what the Lord puts in his mouth. Balaam can only bless Israel and not curse. Balaam wants to, he's trying to, he wants to make his money. But he goes, I can't do anything unless the Lord speaks and puts the words in my mouth. And so in the same way that the donkey tries turning away from the angel of the Lord, and Balaam hits the donkey 3 times, and then the Lord opens the donkey's mouth. It's very similar to the story of Balaam, when Balaam goes 3 times to curse Israel and he can't. And then what we'll see in next week's session is then the Lord opens Balaam's eyes. And so the point here is that in this story, the donkey is basically Balaam. Donkey is a preview of Balaam. And the lesson of this whole thing is the Lord can speak through whoever he wants because he's sovereign and his plans are far bigger than simply Israelite or Jewish prophets, Hebrew prophets. His promised plan of redemption, again, is global. It's far bigger than just what he's doing with Israel. It's for the entire planet. And he will use a pagan prophet if he wishes. Okay, now this is a part of the story to me that is incredibly touching. It says, the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and she said to Balaam, what have I done to you, that you have struck me these 3 times? So here is his faithful, lifelong, servant, the donkey. The faithful mules and the donkeys. I love donkeys and mules. They're such a picture of Christ. They just quietly carry others' burdens. Most of the time quietly. Sometimes they scream and so forth, but they're just such a humble animal. Everybody loves the big, handsome, strong, majestic horse. Everyone loves the horse. The donkeys are such underrated animals, just the beasts of burden, carrying, they don't get the attention, but they're just such a beautiful animal. And they do have that cross on their back, by the way. But here's this donkey. She's like, what have I done to you? Like, you just beat me 3 times. And then Balaam says to the donkey, because you made a mockery of me, you embarrassed me. If there had been a sword in my hand, I would have killed you by now. If I had a sword, I would have hit you much worse than with a stick. So then the donkey responds, am I not your donkey, on which you have ridden all your life to this day? Have I ever been accustomed to do so to you? And he goes, no. You've always been a good donkey. Now, here's the point that I want to make, and I mentioned this in one of the previous sessions. What the verse says is that God opened the mouth of the donkey. It doesn't say that God gave the donkey divine, extra enhanced intelligence. That's not to say that he didn't do that. It could just be that that's the Hebrew idiom that it uses to say the Lord opened the donkey's mouth, but the Lord gave the donkey the ability to speak. So my question when I look at this, again, it's incredibly endearing, as I go, has the donkey always had the ability to think thoughts this complex? I've always been your donkey. I've always been faithful to you. What are you doing to me? Why are you beating me? Like, what goes on in the mind of an animal? We don't ever know, right? My wife and I had a dog, beautiful, amazing little dog named Andy. Years ago on 4th of July, she got all upset, heard the fireworks, and ran off. And we didn't find her for about 5 days. It was really hard. But, you finally find her. And she had a stomach filled with chicken bones. Like, you don't get to ask her, like, hey, what happened? Where did you go? Did someone feed you? Did you find a barbecue? What were they like? What kind of music were they listening to? Were they friendly? Did they treat you nice? Or were you just running around scrapping for food? How did you end up at these people's house, like 8 miles away? Like, tell me everything. They can't tell you anything. But they have thoughts. They do have thoughts. Animals have thoughts. We don't know, and we'll never really know what they're thinking. Anyway, all that to say is I just look at this, and it's so endearing that this donkey's just like, dude, like, why are you beating me? I've always served you. Have I ever done it otherwise? And Balaam's like, no, you haven't. I don't know. I love this story. Verse 31. Then the Lord opened the eyes of Balaam, and he saw the angel of the Lord standing in the way with his drawn sword in his hand. And then Balaam bows all the way to the ground. The angel of the Lord said to him, why have you struck your donkey? Now notice God himself is upset with Balaam for beating the animal. God actually has tremendous compassion on the little ones, including the animals. That's why there are laws in Torah that command people to actually treat animals well and take care of them and feed them and all of these different things, to treat their animals well. He says, why have you struck your donkey these 3 times? Behold, I have come out as an adversary because your way was contrary to me. But the donkey saw me and turned aside from me these 3 times. If she had not turned aside from me, I would surely have killed you just now, and I would have let her live. I would have let the donkey live, but I would have killed you. So then Balaam in verse 34 says, I have sinned. It's always when you get caught. I have sinned. I'm so repentant, for I did not know that you were standing in the way against me. Now then, if it is displeasing to you, I'll turn back. Now again, the Lord said, go with them. And then he goes, and then the Lord's angry. And he goes, listen, if you want me to, I'll turn back. But then the angel of the Lord said, no, go with the men. Well, wait a minute. Which is it? You just said you're going to kill me because you're so mad. You told me to go, and then I went, and then you said you were going to kill me. And now you're saying, yeah, just go ahead and go. Again, it's confusing. But you shall speak only the word which I tell you. He keeps saying this over and over. You only speak what I tell you. Only speak what I tell you. So Balaam went along with the leaders of Balak. When Balak heard that Balaam was coming, he went out to meet him at the city of Moab, which is on the Arnon border, at the extreme end of the border. So it's on the very edge of Moab. Balak goes out to meet him. Oh, you're coming, finally. All right, let's curse these Israelites. Verse 37. So then Balak, the king of Moab, says to Balaam, did I not urgently send to you to call you? Why didn't you not come to me? Again, he's privileged. He's got Moabite privilege. Am I really unable to honor you? Like, did I not offer you enough money? Have I not made it clear that I would honor you? So Balaam says to Balak, behold, I've come to you now. Like, quit yelling at me. Here I am. Am I able to speak anything at all? Like, can I just come and just curse anyone? No. He says, the word that God puts in my mouth, that's what I'm going to speak. He goes, I can only do what God tells me to do. So then begins the process. And this, by the way, according to commentaries, is a pagan process of setting up these altars, sacrificing these animals. And there's 7, which is really fascinating because what this shows is that the peoples of the region use the number 7, not just the Hebrews. Again, in modern times, we often use the sort of metric system. A decade is, we count in segments of 10. The Israelites counted in numbers of 7. That's why we today still have a week of 7 days, but they also counted years and so many other things. Here they set up 7 altars and sacrifice a bull and a ram on each one. It's actually a lot of sacrifices. So Balak sacrificed oxen and sheep, and he sent some to Balaam and the leaders who were with him. And it came about in the morning that Balak took Balaam and he brought him up to a high place of Baal. So the high places of Baal were usually on high hills. When I travel to Saudi Arabia today, down in those regions, you'll still find hills to this day that at the top there'll be all these petroglyphs, carvings of weird sexual acts or even pedophilia or even sacrifice. These are the high places of Baal and some of the ancient places where they would go to engage in their sacrifices. Like they still exist to this day. So he goes up to a high place of Baal where he could just look down to the plains below and see a portion of the people of Israel camped below. So now we're going to transition into Numbers 23. Then Balaam said to Balak, build 7 altars for me here and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me here. There it is, 7. Balak did just as Balaam had spoken. Now, the purpose of all of these altars, again, big stone altars sacrificing 7 cows, was to try to cajole the gods, to try to woo the gods into cursing on Balak's behalf, for the gods to do what man wanted. Hey, if I give you all these cows, will you curse them? That was actually their mindset. But again, it was very pagan. Now, God met Balaam. Again, God came to Balaam. Each of the previous times, he appears to him at night and he speaks. Now here, God met Balaam, and then Balaam said to the Lord, I have set up 7 altars. I have offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. Then the Lord put a word in Balaam's mouth, and he said, return to Balak, and you shall speak thus. So he goes, go to Balak, and I'm going to give you the word. So he returned to him, he and all the leaders of Moab. And here is the first oracle. So there are 4 total prophecies that Balaam makes. This is the first of the 4. So Numbers 23, verse 7 and 8. Balaam took up his discourse and he said, from Aram Balak has brought me. So he was in the region of Aram. So Pethor was in Aram, north of Damascus. You had what was called Aram Damascus. This was the former Assyrian kingdom. He says, from Aram Balak has brought me, Moab's king from the mountains of the east. He says, I've come from the mountains of the east. Again, the regions, the lands of Eden. Exactly how it's described, by the way. Eden was in the east. He says, these are the mountains of the east. And Balak had said, come, curse Jacob for me, and come, denounce Israel. And then he goes, how shall I curse whom God has not cursed? How can I denounce whom the Lord has not denounced? Again, the Abrahamic covenant was not just a little localized covenant given to the children of Abraham. It was global. And so here's a pagan prophet saying, if God doesn't empower me to do it, I can't do it. I can't curse that which God has not cursed because God has chosen to bless this people. Verse 9, and then he says this, I see him from the top of the rocks, and I look at him from the hills. So this statement will later be mirrored, but it's a little bit different. Here he's talking about Israel. Later, he'll use almost exactly the same, this sort of arrangement of words, a little bit different, but he'll be speaking specifically of Jesus, the Messiah. So he's talking about Israel. He says, I see him from the top of the rocks. I look at him from the hills. He's up above. He's looking down at them camped out in the plains below. And then he says, behold, a people who dwells apart. A people who are set apart. The word in Hebrew for holiness or holy is set apart. Set apart for what? For the Lord. This is a people set apart for the God of heaven who will not be reckoned among the nations. They won't be considered among all of the other Gentiles. They will always be exclusive. They will always be the outsider. And this is so much of the reason why we are seeing Jews today being singled out by demonized or demon-influenced individuals. They've always been the state of Israel today, even as the Jews that were dispersed as exiles living among different Christian peoples throughout Europe and the Middle East and Northern Africa. They've always been the Jew among the Gentiles. They've always been this sort of stranger, this foreigner in our midst. And today, the state of Israel is the Jew in the midst of the nations. They've always been a unique, set-apart people for the Lord's purposes. It's the only nation in the world that can claim that. He says, who can count the dust of Jacob? There it is, this vast number, because the Lord was faithful to fulfill his words to Abraham. He said, I'm going to multiply you. Your descendants, your seed are going to be as numerous as the stars of the sky, the sand of the seashore, the dust of the earth. Who can count the dust of Israel? Here it is. Or number, even just the fourth part of them, even a quarter, you can't count them. And then here it is. Balaam says, let me die the death of the upright, and let my end be like this. This is absolutely amazing. He goes, let me die right now while I'm still upright. I haven't compromised for money. I haven't cursed that which God blessed. I haven't done anything unholy. Let me just die right now while I'm ahead. I've prayed prayers like that. Just let me die now, Lord. Before I can't face any more struggles or temptations, but I'm good right now. Just take me now. He says, let me die the death of the upright and let my end be like this. You can see the struggle in Balaam to be righteous. But again, it's almost as though he knew he was ultimately going to compromise for money because that was who he is. And then in verse 11, then Balak says to Balaam, what have you done to me? I told you, I took you to curse my enemies. Oh, I sacrificed all these cows. We did all of this. I paid you, and you couldn't curse them. He goes, but behold, you have actually blessed them. And then Balaam replies, I told you, must I not be careful to speak what the Lord puts in my mouth? I can only do what God lets me do because he is the God of the entire earth. He is the God of the entire earth. Verse 13, then Balak said to him, please come with me to another place. I'm going to ask you again. This is, again, the second time that he's asking Balaam to curse Israel from where you may see them. So he goes to a different hill. So you're looking at them from a different angle. You'll not only see the extreme end of them, you'll see all of them, and you'll curse them for me from there. So he took him to the field of Zophim, to the top of Pisgah. Again, he builds 7 altars and offered up another bull and a ram. Now he's up to 14 bulls and 14 rams. It's a lot of animals. Then the Lord met Balaam again, and he put a word in his mouth, and he said, go to Balak and speak thus. Now here is Oracle 2. He took up his discourse, and he said, arise, O Balak, and hear, stand up and listen to me. Give ear to me, O son of Zippor. God is not a man that he should lie. He goes, listen, you can't manipulate God. You can't tell him what to do. You can't sacrifice a bunch of bulls and just make God do your bidding. He goes, he's not a son of man that he should repent. Has he said, and will he not do it? Has he not spoken blessing over this people? Has he not spoken, and he will not make it good? This is at the foundation of everything that we're talking about throughout this entire study, is to know what God promised, and then to say, do we believe or do we not believe that God is faithful to fulfill all of his promises? Let's take the time and review the promises to understand them as they unfolded, as they expanded. What were the specific components of these promises? What were the specifics of the promises? And ultimately, do we trust God or not? Or do we need to save God by metaphorizing or spiritualizing or symbolizing all of the things that he said? Oh, he didn't really promise land. He didn't really promise to bless Israel. No, he most certainly did. Do we believe him, or do we not believe that he's faithful? And so many Christians today they're trying to save God by saying, oh, well, he said he was going to do that, but he just meant it metaphorically. No, he used words that are clearly intended to be understood literally. He reiterated them. He stated them over and over and over again, multiple times in many different ways, and he left no room for misunderstanding. And so we just have to decide, do we believe him or do we not believe him? Balaam says, behold, I have received a command to bless, and I cannot revoke it. The gifts and callings of God, the blessings of God cannot be revoked. They are irrevocable. The promises to Israel are irrevocable. Again, we talked about this previously. You have so many Christians today that say, no, God made promises to Israel, but he revoked them. Paul says, absolutely not. The gifts and callings of God to Israel, even though they are enemies of the gospel presently, unbelieving Israel, God has not revoked his promises to them to give them the land and ultimately to be their God, and they will be his people, which is to say there is a point in time when all of the remaining remnant of Israel that is alive will all be saved when he returns. When he has not observed misfortune in Jacob, nor has he seen trouble in Israel, like Balaam goes, there's no reason to curse them. He hasn't seen any reason to curse them. The Lord his God is with him. The Lord Israel's God is with him, and the shout of a king is among them. So there's the first hint from Balaam of the king. Now later, as we'll see in next week's session, we're going to look at it in detail. Balaam will prophesy that a king will rise up out of Israel. Now we've already seen that promise coming from Jacob, but here it is drastically expanded upon. Numbers 23:22. God brings them out of Egypt. God brings Israel out of Egypt. Now, as we'll see again in next week's session, Balaam again in a later oracle repeats this exact statement, but he's not talking about Israel, he's talking about the Messiah. So the oracle begins by talking about all of Israel, And then Balaam zeroes in on the ultimate seed, thus validating the whole framework of the Abrahamic covenant. It's promised to the larger collective people of Israel, the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel, but it's ultimately fulfilled through the king, through the Messiah, through the ultimate promised seed. He says, God is for them like the horns of a wild ox. So picture a great big ox with great big horns. That is his defense. That's his strength. God is for them like the horns of a wild ox. Like horns of a wild ox is a good thing to have on your side. For there is no omen against Jacob. There's nothing negative about them, nor is there any divination against Israel. So here he goes. He goes, I tried to do an omen against them, to search for omens, forbidden by Torah. I tried to do divination. It didn't work, forbidden by Torah. At the proper time, it shall be done to Jacob and to Israel what God has done. At the proper time, everything that God promised to them will be fulfilled. Behold, a people rises like a lioness. Here, Balaam is applying the promise that Jacob made to Judah. He's using a lot of that language, but he's applying it corporately to all of Israel. As a lion, it lifts itself. It will not lie down until it devours the prey and drinks the blood of the slain. The original promise of the skull crusher will ultimately be fulfilled through Jesus, through the Messiah, through the crushing one, the skull crusher. But this is the introduction of a really powerful concept, which is that the entire seed line of the righteous, the children of Abraham, we will all participate with the skull crusher in the crushing. That God's people participate with the ultimate divine warrior. And later we'll see that. I actually end the book, Gospel of the Skull Crusher, with the Romans passage in which Paul says, the God of peace will soon crush Satan under your feet. The grace of the Lord be with you all. We'll look at that verse multiple more times. Now, that again, that whole statement will later be reiterated in another oracle, but applied completely to Jesus, not just to Israel, but to Jesus, who is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. Verse 25, then Balak said to Balaam, all right, just don't curse them, don't bless them at all, just don't do anything. Every time I keep sacrificing all these bulls, paying all this money, I tell you to curse them, and then you bless them, just don't do nothing, just stop. You know, you're not helping anybody here. But Balaam replied to him, did I not tell you? How many times have I said to you, are you not a good listener? Did I not tell you, whatever the Lord speaks, that is what I must do? Then Balak said to Balaam, please come, I will take you to another place. This is the third effort. Come on, please curse these people. Perhaps it is agreeable with God that you curse them for me from there. Like if I take you to a different place, maybe God will finally agree to it. So Balak took Balaam to the top of Peor, which overlooks the wasteland, the rough desert. Balak said to Balaam, build seven altars for me here, and prepare 7 bulls and 7 rams for me here. Balak did just as Balaam had said, and offered up a bull and a ram on each altar. So I'm going to stop right there. Next week, we're going to get into Oracle 3 and 4, which are the most important oracles, again, where Balaam really just lays out these prophecies concerning the Messiah. But I did want to take some time to review the story of the donkey, the backstory, just who Balaam is, and again, to highlight this sort of intended literary structure of Numbers 22. I mean, really, sometimes people call it the Book of Balaam. Within Numbers, it's the Book of Balaam, the story of Balaam, and to show that the Lord intended the donkey to be a picture of Balaam. 3 times the donkey is struck, 3 times Balaam beats his donkey, and then ultimately the Lord opens the donkey's eyes, and the Lord speaks through a donkey. Later we'll see that Balaam is basically the donkey. He's like, the donkey's a type of Balaam. Balaam is an unlikely vessel, but despite that, the Lord speaks through whoever he chooses to speak through. So as I said, this is a real fun one. Again, just such an incredibly important next major installment in Torah, in the Bible, of Messianic prophecy, as that golden thread is developing and, again, expanding and growing with each new episode. So I look forward to seeing you next week. We'll jump back in. Hope you all have a blessed and fantastic week. Until then, guys, God bless and Maranatha.